The last time anyone saw them alive, they were shooting arrows in the tower garden. 2 boys, aged 12 and 9, laughing as their arrows found their marks. Within weeks, they would vanish forever, leaving behind one of history's most haunting mysteries. But here's what will chill you to the bone. We know exactly who wanted them dead. We know who had access. We know who benefited. And after 5 centuries of investigation, we still can't prove what happened in those final, terrifying hours. What you're about to discover isn't just another historical whodunit. This is the story of how 2 children became the most dangerous people in England simply by existing. How their own uncle may have ordered their murder. How multiple powerful figures had both motive and opportunity to kill them. And how recent discoveries, including a piece of jewellery that surfaced in 2024, are finally shedding new light on their fate. I've spent a lot of time diving into contemporary accounts, examining forensic evidence, and analysing the competing theories. What I found will fundamentally change how you see this case. Because while historians argue about who gave the order, they all agree on one horrifying fact. These boys knew death was coming for them. Picture this scene. It's late July, 1483. Inside the Tower of London, 12-year-old Edward V kneels beside his bed. His physician, Dr. Argentine, would later report that the boy was seeking confession daily, as though he believed death was facing him. Think about that for a moment. A 12-year-old child, supposedly safe in royal accommodations, so certain of his impending murder that he's preparing his soul for the afterlife. His younger brother Richard, Duke of York, just 9 years old, had only recently joined him in the tower. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, had desperately tried to keep Richard with her in sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. But on June 16th, under immense pressure and promises of safety, she let him go. One chronicler noted grimly that the boy left, never to see his mother again. Now you might be thinking, the Tower of London sounds ominous, but wasn't it also a royal palace? You're absolutely right. Kings traditionally stayed there before coronations. Edward V himself was supposed to be crowned on June 22nd. Preparations were underway, the date was set, but that coronation would never happen. Because while these boys were playing in the Tower Gardens, their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was executing a masterful political coup. On June 13th, during a council meeting at the Tower, Richard suddenly accused Lord Hastings of treason. Within an hour, Hastings was dead, beheaded on a log outside so swiftly they didn't even have time to build a proper scaffold. 3 days later, Richard's agents declared that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had been invalid. The claim, Edward had supposedly been pre-contracted to marry another woman, making his children with Elizabeth illegitimate. Convenient, right? With one legal manoeuvre, Richard transformed his nephews from rightful heirs into bastards. On June 26th, Parliament formally offered Richard the crown. He accepted with what historians describe as seeming reluctance. By July 6th, he was King Richard III. And those 2 boys in the tower, they were no longer princes, they were problems. Here's where the historical record becomes truly chilling. After Richard's coronation, sightings of the boys grew increasingly rare. The Great Chronicle of London gives us our last confirmed glimpse. The boys were seen shooting and playing in the garden of the tower sundry times. But then, as an Italian diplomat named Dominic Mancini reported, they were withdrawn to the inner apartments of the tower. Mancini's account, written for the French court that same year, contains a detail that makes my blood run cold. He describes how the boys were seen more and more rarely behind the bars and windows, until at length they ceased to appear altogether. Think about that image. 2 children watching the world through bars knowing that each day might be their last. By autumn of 1483, Mancini reported, already there is a suspicion that they have been done away with. But who would murder 2 children? And perhaps more importantly, who could? Let me walk you through the prime suspects, starting with the man who had the most to gain and the easiest access. King Richard III. Richard controlled the tower. Richard had declared the boys illegitimate. Richard sat on a throne that rightfully belonged to his older nephew. Every moment those boys lived, they represented a threat to his rule. Even declared as bastards, public opinion could shift. Loyalists could rally around them. In the brutal mathematics of medieval power, their deaths made perfect sense. The circumstantial evidence against Richard is overwhelming. He never produced the boys to counter the rumours of their deaths. He never blamed anyone else for their disappearance. When rebellions rose against him using the princes' names, he could have ended them instantly by showing the boys alive. He didn't. Foreign observers were even less subtle than English chroniclers. In January 1484, the Chancellor of France publicly declared that Edward IV's children have been killed with impunity and the crown has been transferred to their murderer. This wasn't whispered gossip, this was international condemnation. But wait until you hear about the confession. In 1502, a man named Sir James Tyrrell was arrested for treason against Henry VII. Under interrogation in the Tower, the very place where the princes had vanished, Tyrrell allegedly confessed to murdering them on Richard III's orders. According to this confession, Tyrrell recruited two men, Miles Forrest and John Dighton, to do the actual killing. The method? They waited until the boys were asleep, then smothered them with their pillows. After confirming the children were dead, they buried the bodies at the foot of a staircase in the tower, covering them with stones. Now, skeptics will point out that we don't have Tyrrell's actual confession, only second-hand accounts written years later. But here's what those skeptics can't explain away. In 2024, researchers made a stunning discovery. In a will from 1516, they found mention of a gold chain that had belonged to Edward V. Where was this incredibly valuable piece of the boy king's jewellery? In the possession of Sir James Tyrrell's family. Lady Margaret Capel, Tyrrell's sister-in-law, left to her son his father's chain, which was young King Edward V's. How did the alleged murderer's family end up with the victim's personal jewellery? One theory sends shivers down my spine. It was taken as proof that the deed had been done. But Richard III isn't the only suspect. In fact, some historians argue we've been looking at the wrong king entirely. Enter Henry Tudor, who would become Henry VII after defeating Richard at Bosworth Field in 1485. Henry's claim to the throne was laughably weak. He was a distant Lancastrian claimant with barely any royal blood. To strengthen his position, he married Elizabeth of York, the prince's older sister. But think about what that meant. If either of the princes was alive, they would have a far stronger claim to the throne than Henry. The theory goes like this. What if Richard didn't kill the princes? What if he kept them alive but hidden? When Henry took the throne in 1485, he would have discovered them in the Tower, and then, to secure his own power, he had them quietly eliminated. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Henry VII proved perfectly willing to execute other rival claimants. In 1499, he had Edward, Earl of Warwick, another potential Yorkist heir, beheaded. The man was ruthless when it came to protecting his crown. There's also the curious case of Elizabeth Woodville, the prince's mother. In 1487, just 2 years into Henry's reign, she suddenly lost all her lands and was confined to a convent. Why would Henry treat his mother-in-law this way? One theory suggests she had discovered that Henry, not Richard, killed her sons. But there's a problem with the Henry VII theory. No contemporary source, not even Richard's most die-hard supporters, ever accused Henry of killing the princes. If there had been even a whisper of suspicion, Richard's loyalists would have used it as propaganda. They didn't. Which brings us to our third major suspect, one whose betrayal would have cut the deepest. Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, was Richard's right-hand man during the usurpation. He helped arrest the prince's protectors. He supported Richard's claim to the throne. He was, by all accounts, Richard's most trusted ally, until he wasn't. In October 1483, just months after Richard took the crown, Buckingham launched a rebellion. It failed spectacularly, and Buckingham was executed on November 2nd. But the timing is suspicious. The princes disappeared sometime between July and October 1483. Buckingham rebelled in October. Could the two events be connected? Here's what makes Buckingham a viable suspect. He had royal blood himself, descended from Edward III on both sides of his family. With the princes declared illegitimate and out of the way, Buckingham was actually quite high in the line of succession. He also had opportunity. When Richard went on royal progress that summer, Buckingham remained in London with significant power and influence. One piece of evidence particularly intrigues me. A Portuguese chronicle written within years of the event states that the Duke of Buckingham, by his orders, the children were starved to death. Starved to death. Not smothered with pillows, but slowly, cruelly starved. It's a different story, but from a source with no obvious agenda. In 1980, researchers discovered another bombshell. In the College of Arms in London, they found a Tudor-era document stating the princes were killed by the vice of the Duke of Buckingham, by his advice, by his counsel, by his design. Could Buckingham have acted alone without Richard's knowledge? It seems unlikely. The Tower was a fortress, its constable appointed by the king. For Buckingham to murder the princes without Richard finding out would require either spectacular incompetence on Richard's part or his willful blindness. But what if that's exactly why they fell out? What if Buckingham killed the princes, either on his own initiative or thinking he was doing Richard a favour, and Richard discovered it? It would explain the sudden, violent break between former allies. Yet even this theory has holes. If Richard was innocent and Buckingham guilty, why didn't Richard publicly denounce Buckingham for the crime? Especially after Buckingham's rebellion and execution, it would have been the perfect opportunity to clear his own name. He didn't. But wait, there's another possibility that changes everything. What if the princes weren't murdered at all? I know it sounds impossible, but hear me out. In 2023, researcher Philippa Langley, the same woman who found Richard III's remains under a parking lot, claimed to have discovered new evidence. According to her research, documents in European archives suggest at least one of the princes survived into the 1490s. The evidence includes a 1493 manuscript supposedly written by Richard, Duke of York, describing his escape from the Tower. Another document suggests Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I examined a young man claiming to be the missing prince, and verified his identity through birthmarks only the real Richard would have. Remember Perkin Warbeck? From 1491 to 1497, this young man claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. He gained support from powerful figures including Margaret of Burgundy, the boy's aunt, and James IV of Scotland. Henry VII eventually captured him, and Warbeck confessed to being an impostor before his execution. But what if he wasn't lying the first time? Even more intriguing, researchers have found references to a mysterious figure in Devon known locally as the Prince's Ghost. Supposedly Edward V living under an assumed identity in rural England, the folklore persisted for generations. Now I'll be honest with you, most historians reject these survival theories. The evidence is fragmentary, often ambiguous, and lacks the kind of verification we'd need to overturn 5 centuries of accepted history. But the fact that such theories can exist at all highlights the fundamental problem with this case. We simply don't have conclusive proof of what happened. Which brings us to the physical evidence, or rather, the bones. In 1674, workmen renovating the Tower of London made a grisly discovery. Beneath a staircase, they found a wooden box containing 2 small skeletons. Given the persistent legend that the princes had been buried at the stair foot, these bones were immediately assumed to be the missing boys. King Charles II had the remains interred in Westminster Abbey, in an urn bearing the princes' names. Case closed, right? Not quite. In 1933, the urn was opened and the bones examined. The analysis concluded they belonged to 2 children of approximately the right ages, one around 10, one around 12. But the examination couldn't determine sex, couldn't confirm identity, and used methods we now consider outdated. Modern scientists have pointed out numerous problems with the 1933 analysis. The age estimates could be off by years. The sex determination was basically guesswork. Without DNA testing, we can't even confirm these are the bodies of children from the 15th century, let alone specifically Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. The solution seems obvious. Test the bones with modern techniques. Compare the DNA to known descendants of the Yorkist line. But here's the frustrating part. Authorities won't allow it. The Church of England and the Crown have repeatedly refused requests to re-examine the bones, citing religious and ethical concerns about disturbing royal graves. So we're left with a maddening situation. The potential proof of the prince's fate sits in Westminster Abbey, just out of reach of modern science. Those bones could answer our questions once and for all, or they could deepen the mystery if they turn out to be someone else entirely. Let me paint you a picture of those final days, based on what we do know. By late summer 1483, the boys were confined to the inner chambers of the tower. No more archery in the garden, no more playing in the sun, just 2 children behind bars and windows watching their world shrink day by day. Edward V, at 12, was old enough to understand his danger. His daily confessions to Dr. Argentine suggest a boy preparing for death. Can you imagine the conversations between the brothers, the older trying to comfort the younger while fighting his own terror, They would have heard the hammering as workers prepared for coronations that would never include them. They would have noticed the servants becoming fewer, the visitors stopping altogether. They would have wondered why their mother didn't come, why their sisters stayed away, why their uncle the king never summoned them to court. And then, one night, we don't know exactly when, someone came for them. Whether it was Tyrell with his henchmen, or Buckingham's agents, or someone else entirely, the end result was the same. 2 boys who should have been kings were murdered for the crime of existing. Or were they? Because here's what keeps me up at night about this case. Every single piece of evidence we have is circumstantial. Every confession is second-hand. Every theory has holes you could drive a medieval cart through. We have no bodies definitively identified as the princes. We have no direct eyewitness accounts of their murder. We have no smoking gun document ordering their deaths. What we have instead is negative evidence. The fact that they vanished and were never seen again. This absence of evidence has created a vacuum that's been filled with 5 centuries of speculation, propaganda, and myth-making. Shakespeare's play Richard III did more to convict Richard in the public mind than any historical document. The image of the evil, hunchbacked uncle murdering his angelic nephews is seared into our collective consciousness. But Shakespeare was writing under the Tudor dynasty, with every incentive to blacken Richard's name. The earliest detailed account of the murders comes from Thomas More, who was a child when the events occurred and writing decades later under Henry VIII. Can we trust sources with such obvious political agendas? The recent discoveries give us tantalising glimpses of truth. Edward V's chain, in the possession of his alleged murderer's family. Documents suggesting survival that challenge the accepted narrative. Each new piece of evidence reminds us that this case isn't closed. It's still an active investigation, 5 centuries cold but not forgotten. What strikes me most about this case is how it strips away the romanticised veneer of medieval monarchy to reveal the brutal reality beneath. These weren't fairy tale princes in a storybook castle. They were real children, with real fears, caught in a game of power they never asked to play. The Tower of London still stands today, transformed from prison to tourist attraction. Thousands of visitors walk through its gates daily, many pausing at the Bloody Tower, where tradition says the princes met their end. The spot where they supposedly played their last games is marked. The staircase where bones were found is noted in guidebooks. But the tower keeps its secrets. Somewhere within those ancient stones, 2 boys disappeared. Whether they died quickly at an assassin's hands or slowly from neglect, whether they escaped to live in exile or were coldly executed, we may never know. The tower witnessed the truth, but stone walls don't talk. The princes in the tower remind us that history isn't always neat, that some mysteries resist solution no matter how hard we dig. They remind us that power corrupts, that children have always been casualties of political ambition, that even royal blood offers no protection when thrones are at stake. Modern investigators continue to search for answers. Archives yield occasional surprises. Technology advances, offering new ways to examine old evidence. Perhaps one day, a researcher will uncover the document that solves everything. Perhaps the Westminster Abbey bones will finally be tested. Perhaps some European archive holds the key. Until then, we're left with a mystery that refuses to die. 2 boys who vanished, a cast of suspects with blood on their hands, a crime scene that's now a tourist attraction, and questions that have echoed through 5 centuries. Who killed the princes in the tower? How did they die? Where are their bodies? Did they somehow, against all odds, survive? The fact that we're still asking these questions, still investigating, still arguing about the answers, tells us something important. Some stories transcend their historical moment. Some mysteries matter not because they can be solved, but because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, ambition, and the price of crowns. As I finish this investigation, I keep coming back to that image from Dominic Mancini. 2 boys behind bars and windows, appearing less and less until they vanished altogether. It's a haunting metaphor for how they've slipped through history's fingers, visible one moment, gone the next, leaving only questions in their wake. The princes in the tower didn't just disappear from the Tower of London, they disappeared from history itself, leaving a void that we've been trying to fill ever since. And maybe that's their true legacy, not as victims or martyrs or political symbols, but as an eternal reminder that some truths can be lost forever, and some mysteries are destined to endure. What do you think happened to them? After everything you've heard, the evidence, the theories, the discoveries, who do you believe killed the princes in the tower? Or do you think, against all probability, that somewhere in medieval Europe 2 boys started new lives under new names, leaving their royal past behind? Drop your theory in the comments below. If this historical mystery fascinated you, check out this video where I investigate another royal crime that changed the course of history. Until next time, remember, history's greatest mysteries are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally uncover the truth.